So when I was doing my undergrad going to jazz school, there was one thing that really bothered me. A lot of the classes talked about like theory and harmony, like they taught you what notes to play, what scale goes over what chord, like how to create chords and stuff like that. But at some point I got pretty frustrated and I was thinking things along the lines of music isn't only about the notes and the rhythms, it's a lot more than that. So today I'm going to dive in and talk about a little bit of those other aspects of music and how it applies to improvisation. Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Nick. If you're new here, I'm a Brooklyn-based musician. Today I'm going to be talking about how to convey emotion while you're improvising. So a few of these things that I'm about to talk about are things that I find that are a little neglected in jazz communities, or at least like maybe jazz musicians that are really starting off. And honestly, you can't really blame anyone. Jazz is a really hard art form and improvising is a really hard thing to do. And there's so many things to think about. It's like, how do you choose what to work on? What do you choose to focus on? So the first thing that I want to talk about is dynamics. Specifically, I want to talk about the terms piano and forte. Now back in the day, the instrument, the piano, was actually called the piano forte because it had an extreme dynamic range that wasn't available before that. Essentially, the term piano is a form of being really quiet and forte is a term meaning really loud. And for me as a guitar player, that's something that I really had to practice and dial in on because the guitar player isn't a really dynamic instrument. In other words, you can't really get to the extreme of quiets and the extreme of louds. You have to kind of work on that. It doesn't have necessarily the same dynamic range as another instrument. So one exercise I used to work on is basically playing a major scale, and at the bottom of the major scale playing really quietly, basically the quietest I can play, and then slowly start to crescendo, which basically means get louder, until I hit the top note, which would be the loudest point, at which point I would decrescendo, which means to get quieter, and get back down to the quietest point. So an example of that would sound a little bit like this. That was a 2-octave G major scale and I turned around back at the G. Now even with that did feel a little bit sloppy and I felt like it could have been a little better, but that's sort of the point, is to basically have those dynamics. I found this great exercise when I was in undergrad and it kind of basically emulates the human voice. When you're singing, or even if you're playing a horn instrument, when you go up in range, you tend to get higher in volume, and when you go down in range, it tends to get quieter in volume. The guitar doesn't naturally really do that, and actually when we get higher, the strings get thinner, so it tends to be quieter. So this is sort of going against the nature of the guitar and being like a little more natural, like a human voice or like a wind instrument. And the contrast between dynamics is a part of what makes a really great solo, is the difference between loud and quiet. So it's not all just the same thing. It's another variety element that we can include that doesn't necessarily change the content of what we're playing, it's just changing how we're playing it. Here's a short example of that. I'm going to play around in G major and kind of demonstrate. It adds a lot of emotion and character to the music when you start to play with these dynamic ranges. The second thing I wanted to talk about is articulation. Now essentially this is the way that you approach the note. One articulation is staccato, where essentially we're playing really short notes. We have legato, where everything is nice and long and connected. We have accents, which are essentially playing one note or a few notes really loud. And so on. There's a bunch of different articulations that you can explore and incorporate into your playing. So now I'm going to take the G major scale again, 2 octaves. I'm going to play the first octave staccato, then the second octave I'm going to play legato. And finally, when I do the turnaround, I'm going to accent every other note. I'm going to start on every first note. And then when I hit the second octave, I'm going to flip it and essentially accent on 2 and 4. So essentially it'll sound a little bit like this. You also notice that I was alternate picking. That really helps keeping track of beats because my beats 1 and 3 were all on the downstrokes and my beats 2 and 4 were on the upstrokes. So when I was thinking, okay, we're gonna do the 1 and 3, I was thinking accent the downstrokes. When I was doing 2 and 4, accenting the upstrokes. And the third thing you could do is different tonal changes. And this varies between instruments, but essentially just a slight change in tonality. An example I like to use on the guitar is the positioning of where my right hand is playing. This is right between the neck and the bridge. Here it is if I play right on the fretboard. Here it is if I played at the bridge. So we have 3 sounds right there acoustically without having to change any pickups, any pedals, anything like that. We could also decide to play with our fingers. I'm gonna use my index finger and my middle finger. And I have nails, so it'll kind of sound like a pick, but it'll be a little different. I can do the same thing with my thumb. I can play with the pick, but I can palm mute. And there's other guitar specific things, like for example, I can use harmonics. And then I can do what I like to call guitar false fingerings, which is something I got from a saxophone player. Essentially, all you do is alternate between the same note on different strings, and the tonality will change because the gauges of the strings are a little different. Here's an example of how that sounds in a musical context. It's a really cool sound. You could also do things like this. Again, really cool combinations, and it's a way to add some variety. And you could also even tap on the guitar. Finally, I'm gonna improvise for about a minute or so. I'm gonna basically play freely and whatever, and I'm gonna try to use all of these things that I talked about today, the different dynamics, the different articulations, and the different ways of playing the guitar. And with all this, if you feel like you still want more content when you're improvising and you're playing the same kind of things and you want to find more variety in your playing, check out my video on melodic improvisation where I talk about a few melodic development techniques that I learned from classical music and how they can be applied to improvisation and on the guitar specifically. So if you want more improvisation content, check that out. But that's about all I have for today. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, like and subscribe. I'm making new videos every Monday and Thursday, so I hope to see you then. Take care.